All right, so we're going to do this card assignment where we need to create a form that allows you to add a card with a custom name, a horizontal list of cards that are added, cards that have the name on the card, a button to remove the card, and buttons to swap the positions with the card to the left or right. So let's get the ball rolling on this. First thing that we're going to do, and we're going to go over functional React components because that's sort of the standard these days. I'm sure there are probably some places still using class-based components, but functional React with hooks is what everyone's really doing these days. So we're gonna get this started with npx create React app, and we're going to name it move cards. And it's just JavaScript, so we're not going to add the TypeScript template. So this is going to create the boilerplate for the project. And I'll pause the video. So we'll cd into the new directory, and then we'll open it in VS Code. And we're going to get started just by deleting all of the stuff that it comes with right off the bat. We don't need any of this. I'll actually leave the index.js right here, because this has some stuff in there that we'll just end up rewriting anyways. So we'll delete all of that. And let's actually leave app also. And let's just delete all the CSS in app.css. All right, so let's get rid of the header. We'll get rid of the logo. And we'll leave the app.css so we can give it a little bit of styling. And then in the index, we can get rid of the report web vitals, and we can get rid of index.css. All right, so let's get this going. We can do it with npm or yarn. I think I'm going to use yarn. Yarn start. And this should start it on port 3000. I actually might have something already running. So again, let me just pause the video while I get this straightened out. Okay, so I threw the word testing in here just to make sure it was working. And I just put that right in here. So the difference between class-based components and functional components, the big thing is that functional components, it's just functions. It's that simple. It's functions where you're returning JSX at the end of it. So again, just to redo this, you can type function app just like that, or you can do it like this also. Const app equals, so we can use the ES6 syntax, and then if we just move this down there, it does the exact same thing. So if we refresh this, it'll be exactly the same. So in order to get things started, let's make a card. What I want to do, since we're making some UI elements right now, let's make a folder for our UI. Let's do new folder. We'll just call it, we'll call it UI elements. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a card component. So that's going to be card with a capital C .js. So one thing you can do if you're using VS Code, you can install the React Snippets, I believe it's called, the React Snippets extension, and then you can do RFCE, and that will create a React functional component. What is that? RFCE. Yeah, a React functional component with an export. So what you will see most often with functional components, a lot of times you'll see this. You'll see export default function, and then you won't see it at the bottom. Or you will see it at the bottom, but you might see, like we did with the original one, something like this. So one thing that you want to be careful of is that if you want to do both of those things together, you can't export default while you're referring to a function. So what I mean by that is if we do this, export const card, this will work, but the way that we have to reference it now is like this. We're going to say, we're going back to app.js. So again, we're up one level now. We went from card to app. So if we do import card from UI elements / card, if we do this, we're going to get a warning. It's not going to work. What we have to do is we have to wrap it like that because we're not exporting it as the default object. So hopefully that makes sense. I understand I'm not explaining that really well, but I'll show a visualization for you. So now we don't have the error because we're importing it like this, where if we get rid of the brackets, we are going to get an error. So the way that we can fix this, again, we go back to card, is we just need to make sure that we don't export it directly. We have to export default. And now we can import it without the brackets. So let's take a look at it. And now we just see the word card. Just to make it a little bit more clear, let's put this in an H2. And let's do the same thing with app. Let's just do an H2 with app here. And I don't think we really need it, but maybe it will just be, it'll sort of demonstrate where we're working. So let's get this card styled first. Styling is not my forte, not by a long shot, but it's very easy to make a card. So in the same folder, the UI elements, let's do a new file, and let's give it the same name as the component. So we're going to say card.css. And let's give this a class name of card. So now if we go to the CSS, let's give it a border, and we will say 1 pixel black solid, and the border radius, this can be 0.2 rem, I think. Okay, we need to import this. So in the card, we're going to say import card.css. All right, so it's not quite curved as much as I would like. Let's try 0.4. We could probably do a little more. Let's just do 0.5. Okay, that looks reasonable. We can also give it a box shadow. I think a box shadow is a really nice look for a card. I don't always remember how to do this. Maybe like that. I'm actually going to pause the video and look it up real quick because I actually always forget the syntax for the box shadow. Okay, so I played with it just a little bit and got this nice subtle looking box shadow on there. So it's 0, 0, 6, and then gray. And it's subtle enough that it's not obnoxious. But now what we want to do is we have the text right up against the edge here. So let's give it a little bit of padding. And let's try this and see how it looks. All right, not bad. One more thing is I think this font looks really bad. So I'm actually going to recreate the index.css. Let's see, we'll do source. Yeah, I think that's it. Index.css. And if we don't, yeah, so we don't have it in here anymore, so we're going to import. And then in the index CSS, let's just do this. We will say font family. Let me look this up also. All right, so I changed it to Roboto, and now I think it looks a lot better. So we have the outline of the card. So the next thing that I'm going to do here is that we know these cards are supposed to be in a horizontal list. So it should be one card next to another card next to another card. That's what I'm picturing that means. So let's actually put a few cards on here and see what it looks like. I imagine it's going to be vertical by default, and that is what we have. So let's give these cards a little bit of margin first, so it looks a little bit better, so they're not on top of each other. So if we go back to the card, let's say margin, and let's also do 2. Yep, okay, that looks better. One more thing that I think we should do is probably limit the width of the card to maybe something like 200, maybe 300 pixels. So let's see how that looks. Okay, so we're doing better, but now we want the cards to be horizontally organized, so we need to add a flex box. And we don't want to do that right on the card. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another component, and it's going to be called workspace. And the workspace is going to essentially be what the cards are going to sit on top of. So this will be very quick and generic. I'm going to create another folder, and let's just call, here we go, new folder. Let's just call this components. And I'm not worried about the UI elements being outside of the components folder. We could put it in there, not a big deal. Instead, I'm going to use this for components that aren't, I was going to say that aren't UI, but I guess everything's UI. So just for the sake of best practices, let's actually drag and drop the UI elements into there. And then we'll fix the imports. Okay, we're going to say don't do it automatically, let's do it manually. Now in components, we also want our workspace. So new file, we'll say workspace.js. And again, we'll do, actually let's just create it from the ground up. Let's say const workspace. So again, we're just creating a function here with a capital letter. Const workspace equals, and then the ES6 arrow function, and then we will return, let's just return an H2, and we'll say workspace. And then at the bottom, we're going to export workspace as the default. Okay, so now we should be able to call this workspace into our app.js file. And let's fix this while we're at it. We move this into components. And now this is just going to be components / workspace. So let's add the workspace here. And we'll take a look. Okay, so we've imported the workspace. Now, we actually don't want to put the cards in here because the cards are going to be inside of the workspace area. I don't know yet if we're going to use a child component. So actually, I might as well show you that real quick right now because we might end up taking this path. I just need to think it through a little bit. If we want to put something inside of the workspace without actually going into the workspace component, the way that we do that is by passing props to it. There's a special prop, which is the children prop. So if we go over to workspace, we can say props because we're saying that we want to be able to pass properties into it. And now, let's just modify this a little bit. Let's give it a div. I'll give it a class name. Call it workspace. And then again, we'll keep the H2 in there, but we also want to do this. We want the child components. So we'll say props.children. Okay, and let's put that in its own div. All right, so now if we take a look at it, nothing has changed. But what we can do now, if we go back to our app.js, we can make this so it's not self-closing. And now anything that we put in the middle is actually going to be inside of that workspace component. So we can do one more thing. This will be a good example, and it will also be a good opportunity to show how props and children work. If we go back to workspace, let's do a little bit of inline styling. So the way that we do that with React is inside of the div, I'm using the outer div, it doesn't matter. It depends which one you want to apply the styles to. You can say styles equals, and then we can actually create the CSS styles up here. There's a few different ways to do this. In this case, we would just say styles equals styles. But if you actually want to do it inline, instead of defining it up here, then you have to put a second set of brackets around there, because it's as if you're copying everything from the CSS styles and then pasting it in there. So that's why you have double brackets, if you think about it that way. But for the sake of demonstration, we're going to say background color. Now, if it was normal CSS, we would do background color like that. But since we're doing inline styles, we're going to do it a little bit differently. It's going to be camel case. And then the value needs to be inside of quotes. So let's say blue. And now if we take a look at it, that actually did not work. So let me look this over again real quick. And I believe the issue is that this just should be style, not styles. There we go. So now you can see that all the cards, they have the blue background, because if we look at this, they're nested inside of the workspace. Whereas if we move it outside of there, now it's just this area. So that is very important to know. Besides that, besides the children component, you could pass anything in there like this. So we can say, for example, title equals my card. So now inside of the workspace component, now we can reference that. We can say props dot title. And now if we go take a look, we actually have the title inside of the blue area, which is the workspace. We have my card. So there's the title. Yeah, so that's how props work. And now if you delete this, it isn't going to work. So again, that's why we have props up there. And just to make this a little bit more clean, let's do what we were originally going to do. And we'll change this to style. Let's call it workspace style. And now let's define that. And that should also work. So it's still blue. Now this looks terrible, so we're not going to keep it like that. That was just for the sake of demonstration. I changed it to light gray. I'm not sure if it's going to look much better. But one other thing that's different than CSS is you're not going to use semicolons. You're going to use commas, because it's just an actual object. But what we want to do, and the reason we created this, is because we need the cards to be horizontal. So what we're going to do is we're going to say display flex. Again, it needs to be in quotes. And let's take a look. So now the only thing that the flex box has essentially touched is going to be the titles and then the cards as a whole. So let's think about how we can fix this. First off, we don't need the title. That was just for the sake of demonstration. A couple things. I'm going to change this div into a section. And it has a class. Oops, we don't want that to be capital. There we go. It has a class name of workspace, and we're not actually using that yet, but that will be more so for if we want to hover over it with the CSS selectors like this. It's just easier to see if we're in any particular area. So let's see what we can do about this. First off, this could work, having the children, the props in here, the children props. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to import the cards directly into the workspace. You could do it either way. The thing is that once you're nesting children inside of an item, it becomes a lot harder to manage state in a nice, clean way. In some circumstances, it's not always a bad thing, but it feels a little bit weird in this particular case. So instead, let's just bring the cards in here directly. Oh, we don't want that. So let's import the card from UI elements. And let's throw a few cards in there. And we can also get rid of this title, the workspace title. I don't think we actually need that. So now if we take a look, they are actually going horizontal. So this is a good start. We're on the right path here. Just to be clear, I'm not going to leave this gray here, but this is just to help us visualize the workspace while we're working on it, and then I'll get rid of the color afterwards. So there's something else we need to figure out here. We only have 4 cards, and they actually all fit on the screen very nicely, but what if we have more than that? So let's just double this, and we'll take a look. So now our cards are going a little bit off the edge of the workspace. It doesn't look great. It actually looks pretty bad. So maybe we want a minimum width on the cards, but more importantly, we want the flexbox to wrap around. We can also get rid of this props component, this props argument, because we're not using any props in here right now. I'm not great with CSS, so I might have to reference this, but we should be able to do flex wrap. Again, we have to use camel case. Something like that, maybe. There we go. Okay. So let's change the window size and oops. We'll change the window size and see how it affects the cards. Okay, they appear to be doing what we want them to do. We can make it a little bit nicer or a little bit more performant once we actually have everything working correctly. So the cards are actually moving. As a matter of fact, let me think this through because I'm not sure we're following the actual specifications of the assignment. So give me just a moment to read this. Okay, I think I've got this down. So now there's a few things that the card needs to have. One of them is it needs to have a name, so the name of the card. So what we want to do is we want to be able to pass a name directly onto the card component. So let's put a placeholder in here for now. We'll say name equals placeholder. And then if we go to the actual card component, now we want to access props. So we're going to add the props argument. And we'll change this from card to props.name. All right, now let's take a look and see if the first card, it does. It has a placeholder on there. So that's good. So that's how we're going to pass the names in. Now, it obviously doesn't make sense to copy and paste the cards like this. So let's get the card to repeat itself based on the amount of times something occurs in an array. So the way that we're going to do that, we're actually going to use our first set of hooks here. But first, let's just sort of model what it's going to look like. So let's say cards equals, and we're going to have an array. The array is going to have objects in it, and then those objects are going to have a few things. They're going to have a name, and I just have a placeholder in there. Let's see what else they need. As a matter of fact, let's just leave it at this for now. So we'll format it a little bit nicer. Let's do this. And that should be alright for the time being. We can change this to name 2. And then let's actually give it a third value. We'll do a third and a fourth. Name 3, name 4, and let's put the comma there. Alright, so now we have our array of cards. The way that we're going to represent this inside of the component is going to be just like this. If you wanted to loop through them and it was regular JavaScript, you would do something like this. You would do cards.forEach card will console log card.name. And so let's actually just take a look at the console here. So we actually get them printed out. Name 1, 2, 3, and 4. But you can't use for each on the functional components. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use map, which essentially does the same thing, but a little bit differently. But you can think of it as acting like for each for all intents and purposes when we're working with React functional components. So here's an example. We're going to wrap this in curly braces so that we can apply some logic to it. The logic that we're going to do is first we're going to check if the cards exist. So there's a few ways to do it. We could say cards.length is greater than 0. And then if it is, we want the card to print out. Otherwise, no. You know, we could do that. But a much better way to do it is with the ampersand, the double ampersand. So we're saying essentially that if the cards are available and there's more than 0 of them, then I would actually put a question mark here. So we're saying, are the cards available? Does the array of cards have more than 0 values? If so, then show this. So that's essentially what we're saying right now. But we want one card for each of the items in this array. So we're going to add that map functionality. So let's say cards, because again, we're referring to this array right here, cards dot map, just like we would do for each. And now, here's what we're going to do now. We're going to add our ES6 syntax in there, like this. And then let's return this card. So I know that this looks a little bit confusing at first, but it's actually much simpler. If you forget about this, just keep in mind we only have this in there to protect it from trying to render this if we don't actually have any cards. So all we're really dealing with right now is this, cards.map. So we're taking an array, we're mapping it onto the DOM, and we're returning each card individually. So I'm going to put this back in just for, safety purposes. I'm going to delete this because we don't need it anymore. And now let's see what happened. So now we have 4 cards. If we want this to be the actual card name, now we can do this. We can create this variable right here, which is going to be card. So for cards.forEach, think of map as for each. Cards.forEach card, we want to print this out, and we want the name to be mapped to that card.name. So now if we take a look at it again, now we have name 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're moving in the right direction. But you see this error we have right here. It's saying that each child in a list needs a unique key property. It worked, but that's still a problem that we have to deal with. So what we're going to do is on the card component, we're going to give it the attribute of key equals. And now we could say, what do we want the key to be? We could make it the card name, but if we do that, now if 2 cards have the same value for name, you're going to get a different error. So instead, let's just get the index, just like that. So for each time it iterates over the array, it's going to give us a new index starting with 0. So we can set that key to I now, and if we take a look at it and refresh the page, now the errors are gone. So let's move on. Just like we can pass properties through the card just like this, we can do the same thing with functions. But there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. So for example, let's say we want to send a function through on here and we want to call it delete card. Let's actually create that function. So what we might want to do is pass in the index. So we'll call this index. And then we will say cards dot splice I always forget how this works. Cards.splice, and I think we want the index and then the number of values. So let's see what that does real quick. Let's do delete card. And let's say we want to delete the card at index 1, which would be name 2. And let's console log this and just see what happens. And then let's also console log the actual cards array and see what it looks like both before and after this. I'm sort of going from memory here, so bear with me. I'm also going to delete this delete card. We'll add that back on in a minute. But we need it to compile. So let's take a look. Okay, so the first one, we have 4 cards. We have 0, 1, wait a minute. No, we only have, it says 4, but then when I expand it, it's only showing 3, which is really strange. We have name 1, name, oh, I see what's happening. Okay. So since we're using this as a placeholder, arrays they essentially are mutable in JavaScript. So even though we're printing it before and after, it's giving us the same value both times because of hoisting and how that works with JavaScript. But at least we know that the function is doing what it's supposed to do, and that's all we were really trying to establish. With that said, we can go ahead and delete this stuff. But now we want to pass this delete card function through as an attribute on the card. So what you might think to do would be one of these two things. This is two of the big mistakes a lot of people make. They'll do this. Delete card like that. Or in some instances, you'll do an inline arrow function and do it this way. In reality, we're not going to we're not going to run it right here. We're just going to send through the pointer. So by sending just the name of the function, that allows us to send the pointer so we can then call the function in the card when and where we want to do it. So let's take a look and see how we would do that. If we go to the card component, now, one more thing you can do, and this is personal preference, I like doing it this way. You can say const, and then you can pull the props out here. So we'll have name and delete card equals props. Then we can get rid of this props.name, and we can just refer to it as name. With delete card, what we need to do now is we need the button that's actually going to delete this card. So let's add that button. So delete me. Now let's add the onClick listener. So on click, what do we want to do? We want to delete the card. But we also need the index. So again, two ways that we can do it. We can run it sort of inline like this, passing the index in. Or what I prefer to do, because I think it's a lot cleaner, is to have a delete card handler. So we'll call this delete card handler. And below where we're pulling that delete card function out, but above the return statement, so right here, I'm actually going to create a delete card handler. And it's just going to be a function that's responsible for calling delete card. Now the reason I want to do that is because we still need to pass the index in, and once we start passing things in like this, it starts to get a lot harder to read, a lot harder to follow. So I like to follow this particular convention where you use the pointers and the handlers. So again, this is still the pointer. We're not calling it because we don't have this in there. We're just referring to it. We're using the index for the key. So we need to get that same index. We need to get that passed in here. So we can't reference the key. At least I don't think we can. So instead, we're going to say card index. And the indexes are going to be really important for the rest of the assignment. So that card index is going to be I. Now we can go back over to the card and we can reference it. We can pull it right out of here. Did we call it I? I already forgot. No, we called it card index. Okay, so now we've got access to that card index, and let's put it right in here. So nothing is going to change right now. If we go over here and we try clicking these, nothing's going to happen. The reason nothing's happening is because we're not managing the state correctly. So if we go back to the workspace, we have this sort of state right here. The good news is that when you're using functional components and you're using hooks, it's so much easier to manage state. So let's do this. Right now, we're going to assume that this information is coming from a data source, like a database or something. So let's take it and let's actually put it at the top level. We'll put it in app.js right here. And then let's try passing it through. So we need to get that into workspace. We'll say cards equals cards. And now in the workspace, we need access to that. So again, we'll do props. And then we're going to extract the cards from the props. Oops. All right. So now we can actually take this delete card function. Let's put it down here so we can actually reference the cards appropriately. All right. So far, so good, I believe. They still show up, so we know that we're getting the correct data. Now at the top level on the app.js, what we want to do is we want to import React. So import React from React. I'm going to move this CSS to the bottom. Now in order to pull in hooks, the way that we do that is we're going to reference it like this. So we're going to pull in use state. Use state is the easiest React hook to use. It's so ridiculously easy. I love using it. What we're going to do in order to instantiate it is it has to be inside of the actual React component. Otherwise, it won't work. So inside here, we'll say use state. And then let's just put a blank string. Or better yet, let's do this. Let's put an array of objects in here. Hi there. Hi there. Okay, so this is similar enough to what we're actually trying to get. I had a typo in there, so I fixed that. And yeah, so now you can see a little bit more clearly. This is essentially what we want to do. We want to use the state, but we want to pass in the information into it. So what we're going to do, anytime you use the use state hook, it's going to return a tuple. So this is a little bit strange, but it's also really cool. What we want to do to get it started, let's actually default it to null. But then we're going to say const, and we're going to put an array right here. This array is going to have two values. We're going to have the cards, and then we're going to have a function that sets the cards. So it's going to start with the word set. Now we're already using cards right here, the variable name. We don't want to do that. So let's call this temp cards. That should work. Now, in order to set the state of this, we can either set a default state, just like this, or we can keep it set to null, and then we can set the state like this. So that's how easy it is to use the use state hook, is that you just refer, just like we have the cards being passed in right here, it's just being treated as a variable that's holding the data that we're sending in. So everything should still work. Actually, I know the problem that we're having this is an infinite loop problem. And this, yeah, see, too many re-renders. This is where one of the more confusing hooks comes in, but it's also extremely important, and you don't have to overcomplicate it. So that would be the use effect hook. So essentially, this is how you should think of use effect, especially if you're just getting started. Anything that you want to happen exactly once, automatically, put it inside of the use effect hook. It has a slightly strange syntax. So what we're going to do, we already imported it right here, use effect. So all we're going to do is use effect, and it's going to be a function. And then inside of it, we're going to put another function, an anonymous arrow function. And then at the end of the anonymous arrow function, we're going to do comma, and then put an empty array in there. So if you think about what's actually happening here, I thought I'd be able to articulate this a little bit better, but now that I'm on the spot, I can't actually think of a great way to say it. Anything that happens inside of this use effect function right here, this is only going to happen once, just once, one time only. And so let's move this set cards up into there, because what was happening before is it was loading. It was setting the cards to null, and then it was trying to reload. It was setting the cards to the temporary cards, and it was trying to reload. Then it was setting the cards so we were stuck in that infinite loop. Now what's going to happen is by default, it's going to set the default value of cards to null, and then it's going to use the set cards function to set the state to the value of the temporary cards. It's going to do it once, and then it's going to go on acting like normal. Now, if you want this use effect hook, if you want this to refresh every time the data changes, you can put the variable that you want to watch inside of here. So if we were to do temp cards, for example, anytime the temp cards value changes, it's going to rerun this hook. But you really don't have to worry about that right now. If you leave it empty, it's saying just run this just once. So let's see if that got it working. And it did. Let's refresh it. No errors. So far, we're looking pretty good there. I also just realized that we still have all of these cards here. These need to be deleted, and we could change this into a self-closing component. And now we don't need to reference the card element here anymore. So let's make sure everything's still working. We'll refresh it, and everything looks good. All right. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to be able to delete cards and move cards around. In order to do that, we're going to want to send this set cards hook, or I'm sorry, the set cards function that we got from the use state hook. We want to pass that into the workspace so that we can actually change it inside of the workspace if we need to. So let's say set cards equals set cards. So now we should be able to use that hook from inside of the workspace component. We just need to reference it here. So we're pulling it out of the props. So now, when you say that you want to delete a card, what we're going to do is let's make a copy of the cards array. So let's say const card array, let's say card ARR equals, and we're going to do this. We're going to just make a copy of the cards array using the rest syntax. So we're making a copy of the cards array. Now, instead of using the actual cards, we're going to use the new card array variable that we created. So now we're creating a copy of it, and then we're removing the specified value from it. And now we want to set the new value to the original cards using set cards. So now we need to put the value inside of here. So let's just put the card array. So just so you see what's happening here, because of what we mentioned earlier about how arrays can be modified, we're actually creating a copy of the array, then we're modifying this copy of the array by removing the single value from it, and then we're setting the cards to that array that we just modified. So if we save it, let's refresh. I was obviously playing with it a little bit to make sure I wouldn't waste any time recording, but this will work. So let's get rid of number 2. We click that and it's gone. Get rid of number 3. Now we just have 1 and 4, and we can also get rid of those. Okay, so that's all working correctly. Now, what do we want besides deleting the card? We want to move the card left or to move the card right. So let's just create a function for each of those. Move card left and move card right. So the only thing that we need to do is to change the order of the array, essentially. So what we're going to do, let me think this through for just a second. While I'm thinking that through, we might as well actually put pointers to those functions on the card. So we'll say, let's actually just do this. We'll copy that, we'll paste it in there, and then there we go. So now we've got move card left and move card right that we're passing on to the cards. For right now, let's just do this. We'll say console log move me left. And we'll do the same thing here for move me right. And then let's actually put those buttons on the card. So if we go to the card component, we need to put 2 more buttons on here. It probably makes sense to do it like this. We'll have the middle one be to delete the card, and then we'll have the one on the left to move it left, and then the one on the right to move it right. So let's see, what did we name it? Move card left and move card right. And we'll change this to move right. Change this to move left. And now we need to extract that from the props. And let's take a look. So now we've got 3. We'll worry about the formatting in a little bit. I'm not too concerned about that until we make sure everything's working correctly. But if we click it, let's see if it logs in the console. Okay, so they're both doing move me left. I'm guessing I just copied it wrong. Possibly. We want to look at the workspace. Oh, yeah, okay. Move me left, move me right. Okay, beautiful. Everything's working perfectly. So we're essentially going to do the same thing that we just did with the delete card. Let's actually just copy this logic. And we're going to obviously modify it a little bit, but this will help get us started. And actually, let's do one at a time, because then we can copy everything down. So what we want to do now is we want to get the index of the card, and we already have access to the index because we're passing the index through right here. So just like we did with the delete card function, we just need to specify index there, and we'll specify it here also. So what we want to do is we want to swap the card at the current index from the card at the index -1. Now, there's obviously some implications if you're on the first or the last card, and we'll address that in a minute. Those are quite literally the edge cases. But let's just do the basic logic first. So we're going to need some more variables here. We're going to need a left card and the current card. So we'll have left card and current card. And we can make those both constants. So to get the card on the card to the left, let's actually start with the current card first. To get the current card, we're going to reference this card array, the copy of the cards. And we're just going to say of index of the specified index. And this should give us the current card. And if we do the card to the left, what we want to do is card array of index -1. So that should be accurate. Now, we need to figure out what exactly are we going to do with that. And I'm going to think about this for a second. Okay, this should actually be really easy. We should be able to take the card array and we'll specify that we want to replace the card at the index to the left of us. So we want to take index -1 and we want to set that to current card, just as we want to do the same thing, but we're going to do card array of index, and we want to set that to left card. So, and then again, we're going to set the cards. So let's see if that works. I'm actually not completely sure. I think it'll work. Let's find out. So we want to move this left, and it appears to not have worked. So let me think through this again for a second, because I'm not thinking about this right, apparently. I see what's happening. So the problem is actually not that we did anything wrong here necessarily, but just to show you what I did, I tried to log it out and they're coming up undefined. So I'm thinking, why is that happening? That's happening because we're not actually specifying the index. So if we take a look at the card component, we're passing in move left and move right, but we need to actually give the index here. So just like we have the delete card handler, we need a move left handler and a move right handler. So we have move left, move right equals all right. So for the move left handler, we're just going to say move card left, and we need to pass in the index. And although we're not there yet, we're going to have to do the same thing with the move right handler. And then we need to change this to move left handler and move right handler. All right, so let's try this move left handler again now. All right, it looks like that worked. And again, it's going to crash because at the edges it doesn't actually work. So we'll get to that in a minute. So let's just copy all of this logic right into here. And then we need to have, this is going to be the current card, that'll be the same, but then we need this to be right card. We'll change this to right card. And then instead of -1, we're going to want +1, because we want the card to the right. So that's one index higher. So let's see if that works now. There we go. So we moved it to the right. So far, everything's good. Now let's be careful about the edge cases here. Let's think about how we can do that. There's two ways that I can think of doing it. The first way is going to be, we can just put an if statement in here. We could say if index is not 0, then we're good to go. Otherwise, we can put an alert here. Let's see if that works. I think there's actually a more elegant solution though. Can't move left. But if we do this one, and now we're back on card 1 again, now it works. They're back in the right order. But again, if we click that, same thing. Okay, so that's one way we can do it. I think a more elegant way is going to be to actually not show the button at all if we can't do it. So let's take a look at the card component and think about how we can do that. We only want this to show up if the index is greater than 0. So let's see, do we have access to the index here? We do, we have the card index. So let's say card index is greater than 0, and I think that should be enough. Let's take a look. Yep, so we don't have the option to move left now. So let's do the same thing over here. This one's going to be a little bit more tricky, but not really. We're just going to say card index is less than, what do we want to do? We want to do cards.length. So we have access to the cards, right? No, we don't actually have access to that in here. Not a problem though, we can pass it in. So let's say that we want to pass it in with the name all cards. And we'll get to that in just a second. So we will say if the card index is less than all cards.length, and let's put a question mark here just to be on the safe side. So essentially it's not going to crash if we don't have any cards there. So if the card index is less than the length of all the cards, the problem with that is that the index is always going to be less than the length. So we can do card index plus 1 or all cards dot length minus 1. The reason that we're doing that is because the array is indexed at 0 and the length is actually the length. So that's why we have that plus 1 or minus 1 discrepancy there. So now this logic should make sense. We do have to pass in all of the cards into each individual card, which is not a big deal at all. Let's just do that real quick. All cards equals, I think it's just cards, right? Yeah, cards. And now if we take a look, we should be missing the furthest right button. Yep, so here we only have 2. We have delete me, we have move right. Here we have move left and delete me. So we can't move this one right, we can't move this one left. Let's try styling this and making it look just a little bit nicer. On the card component, we're going to do a little bit of styling here. We actually have a card.css. So let's call this section right here with all the buttons, we'll call this actions. Let's make it a div. And we're going to put all of these inside of actions, just like that. And then we need to create a class for actions. So real quick, I just threw together this actions class, and we have display flex, margin auto, justify content space evenly. And now it looks like this, which is nicer. Instead of putting the text on the card, let's actually do this instead. Let's use some emojis. Obviously, you would want to use icons normally, but I think for an assignment like this, like when I do interview assignments, I always just use emojis wherever I need them. So let's do right arrow. That'll work. And then left. Right here. And then delete. Let's do a trash can or something like that. All right, let's take a look and see how it looks. All right, not the most beautiful thing in the world, but it's fine. Let's see if we can make these buttons look just a little bit nicer too. So on the card.css, let's actually, we'll do this. We'll just reference the HTML element button, and let me find some settings that look good. Okay, so all that I did here is I gave it the background color transparent, the border 0 pixels, and I changed the cursor to be a pointer, so it looks like this, and when we hover over it, we still get the correct thing. The last thing that I would want to change on here is going to be what these actually look like. So let's say we wanted to only take up 1/3 of each of these. Right now, it's actually referencing the buttons directly because we have that, that styling attached to the class name of actions. So what we can actually do here is we'll make 3 separate divs. And we'll put each of the buttons inside of one of these divs. Yeah, that should be all right. There we go. Now everything is, see if we hover over this, you can actually see how it's working, like how it's styled. So here we can't go right, so it's not rendering the right one, but it's still in the correct place. We might want to center all of this stuff. So in the index.css, let's just do text align center. And then one last thing. We don't want this ugly light gray background, so we're going to remove that from the workspace style. What I actually think we should do here is in this components folder, let's do this. We'll do new file, we'll call it workspace.css. And then let's actually copy this. We'll say import workspace.css. We'll paste it in here. And let's call this workspace. So we have display flex, and then we have flex wrap. That needs to be switched back to there. And what's the problem? Workspace style is not defined. Where is workspace style? Oh, okay, I see. We can get rid of this now. And we already have this class name of workspace, so we should still be good. And we don't need the word app here anymore. So I actually see one more error that we have to fix. So let's get rid of this H2. Take a look. All right, that looks better. It looks like it's still to the left a little bit. So if we hover over it, we can see what the problem is. We actually want to space these out a little bit. So in the workspace CSS, we should be able to, I believe, justify content center, or space evenly, actually, it would be better. Let's see, is that it? Space between, or space around? Probably space around. No, space between actually works. So you have 1, 2, 3. Yeah, okay, looks like it's working nicely. All right, so I guess there's some more stuff you could do to make it look a little bit nicer, but this is the assignment. I mean, this is nitpicking at this point, but let's change these from, first of all, let's put a space in there. And let's change each of these to say card title and then the number. Card title 1, card title 2. There we go. So I think that we're in good shape. Yeah, looks good to me. And we are at 1 hour, just over 1 hour. All right, perfect. So that is how you do some of the DOM manipulation with React functional components, and hopefully that was a good enough explanation.